what does constitute truth then? If it seems that it's the construct that is most acceptable to you at present in handling the reality you're facing. It's the explanation of relationships of things that you find most useful, most appropriate to your values. You need to know your values, what you value, and of the various explanations you could have, various theories, constructs, the one you adhere to is the one that best fits your values. You need to know your values, and you need to have a choice of constructs, a choice of potential truths. There's nothing ultimate about this truth. It is simply a way of explaining or laying out or picturing relationships in such that it's better than any other way of doing such. So in the secular science point of view, we constantly update our theory according to current research. Is heavily reliant on the mode of research that we use. You could say, if anything, we worship as scientists the actual method that we use, the Dharma, the teaching. This is the way to develop our understanding of truth, the reality. That there is a reality out there that we can understand. One of the basic tenets or principles of the faith. Now, its acceptability to us is paramount. It turns upon what we value, what we see perhaps truth to be, perhaps what we see the value of truth to be, the value of our values, why we hold our values. We are then ever considering, does this explanation lead to the behavior that I can carry out that results in meeting the goals that I have given my values? Briefly, does this conception of reality that I have allow me to achieve the outcome that I value? If it doesn't, then I seek an alternative explanation that allows me to act in a certain way that results in a better outcome according to my values. And of course, as an aside, if it does and I follow such, I may find that the outcome, although it's what I expected, is not as appreciated as I thought. It has a bad side in the outcome that I didn't anticipate. And so my values may change. Our conception of causal relationships, then, really follows from the coincidences we notice of different occurrences. We test if one does result in the other happening. If it seems to, we say it seems to be the cause. There's a causal relationship. And of course, further experience may prove us to be wrong some of the time, and we might seek a better understanding or structure of the causal relationships going on that explain the evidence that we see. But this means also with personal goals and so on, that if I find a certain conception of reality, God having certain values, doesn't result in me having a happy outcome life. Namely, the outcome conflicts with my values. Quite simply, following this sort of religion doesn't make me a happier, more vibrant person, but rather depressed and unhappy. Then I'll be attracted to a religion that seems to do better, or promises to do better in this regard. I won't have proved either religion wrong or right, except from the point of view of which one I'm happier with as regards its outcomes or expected outcomes. Given my values, evaluating such outcomes. So, example, Marshall chooses, back when he's 24, he realizes rather, he does want to believe in God, which is a big change for him. He now, in effect, experiments with living as though this were so, that God existed, and a God that's pre-specified according to his values. And he compares that at times with living according to a God that meets the best specification of whatever religion he belongs to for some periods of time. Then, ideally, he decides which is the best as he sees it, which has the best outcome, which brings the most joy and success and handles difficulties best, and so forth. He's then attracted to, in my case, a more individualistic, less conforming approach to religion. When he does meet major difficulties, he finds that existing religions don't really come up to the mark and help very much, and his more individualistic understanding of what might work and what might not, what to put his trust in, does. So he develops accordingly. Has Marshall found the truth? Well, he lives in a world of uncertainty still. No, he hasn't proved anything. He has found a spiritual view that he finds, given his values, to be optimal, preferred. And he lives accordingly. Now, depending on what your values are, if your values are the same as his, and they might be quite close to that, then this is the way to go. If your values are not, the obvious, if you've got very materialistic values, then this is not the way to go. That doesn't mean you're wrong, or that I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're right. It is the truth as you see it, given your values. In our short-sightedness, because when we actually achieve some of the goals, we can find that they're not valued in the way that we thought they would be. And we'd like to avoid them in the future rather than purpose them. We change our values. Now, I can't prove that my set of values is best helped by my philosophy and your set of values best helped by yours. I do get the impression that our values as such are not that different. We all value happiness, not suffering. We value joy, we value peace, we value creativity. We're different in, the emphasis we might put on these things, but very few people value death, not unless, life is so unpleasant at the minute. I mean, they don't. Most people value healthy, active living. We might not want to all be out in nature. Some of us just value, problem solving on a computer, but do we find doing what we value to remain what we value in the long run, or do we find experience of it shifts us to something else? I mean, for argument's sake, if computing gave you all sorts of back and shoulder trouble and eye strain and, wrecked your marriage and so on, then perhaps, your values would shift off of doing computing as your life's calling. In some sense, we'd say that we found that the truth of the matter was that computing wasn't the best thing for you after all. There is a truth, objectively, which we surmise we are moving towards, we assume, and hope that our strategy of living, whatever strategy that is that we choose, will lead us in the right direction, rather than away from it to more and more difficulties in life. We've got then sort of in our mind the other extreme needed theory for what happens in the infinite future. In the infinite past, we might have, for instance, I haven't, but we might have the Big Bang theory. This is the infinitely back starting point somewhere. And the infinity of the future might be wanted to be considered, hoped to be an eternal future, and good at that. So we would then be saying, I'm evaluating things in terms of the possibility of doing best in this regard, of valuing eternal heavenly life. Now, it's very hard to predict what's best in the short term, in this life, as regards the achievement of such a long-term goal. It might be, for instance, that this life is best spent in great difficulty and great success and overcoming of such, that the eternal life be wonderful. That one actually does want an awful lot of difficulties now, not a comfortable, peaceful, joyful, continuously happy life. It's this, a bit like the projection problem in statistics. The fact that I can see a trend now doesn't mean to say that this trend is appropriate to the future that I'm wanting. I'm wanting a sort of infinite bliss, and the current, present, temporary sort of future, this life, seems to show me gradually getting happier and happier as I move through life. Can I therefore infer that this is the way to go? This will achieve, if this continues, this trend into infinity, I get an infinite sort of happy, trendy life indefinitely. You might think, a bit doubtful. Well, it's as doubtful as the Big Bang theory going backwards, isn't it? That if I extend the trend backwards of the expansion of the universe as I see it at present, I go back to a point where everything would be in one dot, and that dot getting smaller to infinitely small. That's not what we normally find to be a reliable sort of argument in statistical theory. If I see the trend over the last 5 years has been an increase of 4%, I can expect that the coming year might be a 4% increase, perhaps even for the next 4 or 5 years. It's very doubtful that the 4% will be a reliable estimate for the growth rate in 100 years' time, 1,000 years' time, 1,000,000 years' time. Of course not. So why should one assume that because the universe is expanding at the minute, that the cause of its expansion goes back to the beginning of time as opposed to some time ago? I mean, the obvious one was that the universe is in some sense breathing. It expands out and then it loses momentum and gradually falls back in again. This would be then assuming that in some sense the universe of the space is not space, but perhaps it's a very thin dark matter that the stars and the galaxies are expanding through. In which case you can imagine there's this big bang, but then we find there's some evidence that no, the expansion's getting bigger and bigger. Now that's a very strange explosion if the expansion's getting faster and faster as we look at it through time. What sort of an explosion is that? Where things get faster and faster, where's the input of energy coming from? In which case we've got some very odd behaviour going up there, which is not what we would expect, and certainly doesn't leave us happy about extending the current trend backwards to the whole universe being contained in the smallest dot conceivable. What we can say is, what explanation is most useful to us at present? It seems that the universe is expanding and is expanding at an increasing rate. That's interesting. I wonder what the outcome could be. It's a bit like national and international news. I may know what the news is, or at least believe I do, because I believe the reports that are coming over the media, perhaps, if you're gullible. But I can't do anything about it. One person in anything from a society of 5 million to 1 billion people is not going to influence, in any reasonable sense, the outcome of my reaction to the news is not going to make that much difference. It may help in that I know which way to jump as regards what the future's going to be. Depending upon how reliable the news is and how predictable things can be from such evidence. So in large measure we do live according to what gives us the greatest comfort and success within our perceived as reliable horizon. If I, for instance, have no idea whether I'm going to live to 60, 70 or 80, when I'm the age of 20, it might be best not to consider too much, having a wonderful career, owning a house, having enough money to pay for my stay in a rest home for the last 10 years of my life. He went under a bus at 35, 40 and it was all wasted. You see what I mean? So he should discount the future, given he's facing uncertainty. He is forced to give preference to rationally optimizing the present more than the future. He gives preference to the present. And so it is with our choice of truth and what we're doing as a consequence of our understanding of causal relationships and so forth. Does trusting in God result in me having a happier, more fulfilling life? If the answer is yes, that's the way to go. If you're finding the answer is no, you're going to try something else until you're clearer. You may stay with the something else, or you may swing back to something else. Back to where you were, or back to something slightly different to where you were, and so forth. In other words, it's your perception of the truth that's going to be important to you, and that's going to depend on your values, hopes, expectations, and so forth. And you will believe or not believe in any particular thing, relationship, cause or setup, situation accordingly, according to your values and your experience to date. Now, religion does not claim that this was the best strategy. It says, no, believe what we say. Our scripture is far more reliable and better than you're going it according to your values at present. You should simply adopt a way of life that's consistent with this set of values, not yours. Well, you will respond according to what your point of view is. If you're having really great difficulties in the way you've been living, you may say, perhaps you're right, let's give it a try. And according to the outcome and your values, whether you stick with it or not. You will never be sure that you come any nearer truth in some overall sense, but it's truth in terms of the transitory world that you're in and your view of it. Whereas the religion is claiming to present you with some absolute, in fact, the absolute truth that you should accept in faith, and this will be best for you. I mean, when you point out some members seem to get crucified and mistreated and so forth, the response is usually, yes, well, that's what appears in the transitory, but in the longer run it's worth it because you have, for instance, eternal life. And you may be concerned as to how much evidence there is of such. You might look to near-death experiences, see what the record is. Are they consistent with each other? You might look to the incredibly impressive nature that some scriptures have. I belonged to a group that studied the Torah, and there was 5 or 6 absolute experts there who knew the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, from cover to cover, so to speak. Every detail. It was quite astonishing. And it is an amazing book, a bit like Psalm 119. It's just staggering when you look at its pattern from the Hebrew language, letters and numbers point of view. The patterns that come out of Psalm 119. And Psalm 119 is extraordinary in many ways. You may be impressed by such signs, amazing things, or healings that your local pastor has, and therefore perhaps he's right in what he's saying as well. So perhaps this is more right than experience would be. I can take it on trust because of the amazing things that I've seen. I'm willing to accept their understanding, or this understanding of what is truth, what is true. This might be questioned or shattered if you come across other religions that are equally successful in different ways, with different scriptures, with perhaps differently declared values as well. And you may in a quandary, aren't you? Or you may shut your eyes to all other possibilities as a sort of faithful, trusted follower, disciple, and therefore deny yourself such possible byroads or avenues to the actual truth. You won't know. Whatever the reality is, you will still live in a world of uncertainty and change and death. And if you feel you don't live in such a world as that, well, most of us think you're probably wrong. You may be so persuaded because of your experience that that doesn't matter to you. The thing is that either way, the onlooker will choose what he thinks is his best option, given his values and according to what he sees and how he sees it. What he sees and how he sees it will change with further living, further experience, whatever path he takes. What he can't do is jump from what he does value now to what you might think he should value now, because he will only accept what he finds as acceptable according to his present values. Circumstances of which you might contribute towards, of course, including your suggestion and advice, may influence that. Especially if you yourself are an example of something that he values already. I mean, for argument's sake, if you're a happy sort of person and have the sort of success that he values, then he may be drawn to, at the very least, giving you a good hearing, and at the most, following your sort of way of life. So we surmise that there is a way of living that is best for the values that we have, but that the values we have might be astray and change with such experience. But we might be wrong in thinking that there's only one absolute way of life that is ideal. There may be many ways of life that are ideal from different perspectives. According to what values you have. And such values may be satisfying when pursued. In other words, the achievement of what they value may give satisfaction sufficient for you to continue in such. We don't know. You know, in the short run, you might have a happy life being a builder, an accountant, a motor racer, a farmer, an academic, any one of them ways of life could be such that it brings satisfaction to the values that you have. If you have those values that value such, you may find life very satisfactory. What we would tend to say from that possibility is that heaven is not made of clones that all have the same values and do the same thing. It could be made up of a vast variety of beings that are satisfied by different things, but that those activities are also in harmony with one another. Else, of course, there's the difficulty of discord. So we see that we can both imagine the nature of God, the nature of heaven, the sort of fellowship and company one might want, but all of it in terms of what we're used to here. And it doesn't seem wise to assume that what we're used to here is what we'll be getting used to there. In fact, it seems very unwise to assume that. What we do seem to need to bear in mind is we don't know. And that affects our decision making now. We can imagine, we can hope for that to know the truth will indeed set us free. Free to be fulfilled into a fulfilling future, whatever that is. Quite simply in the phrase life eternal. Thank you, Dan.